we are coming to our next term and our next guest. The term will be colonialism, and our next guest will be Tania Mancheno. She's an independent researcher and teaches political sciences and geography at the University of Hamburg. She's also an associate member of the Research Center Hamburg's Postcolonial Heritage and Early Globalization. Her research focuses on decolonial and afrocentric feminist theory, phenomena of postcolonial urban violence, and the European discourse on colonialism. Please welcome Tania Mancheno.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. It's been inspiring. Okay, so let's begin with my word, and I have to begin by stating the obvious. I will not be able to speak about colonialism, coloniality, colonial history within 10 minutes. And I do need to say this because it's a history which has been hunting us for the last 500 years, and we still do not know enough to deal with it, nor to read it in the facades of our cities. So a history which is actually older than our cities and has an impact in almost every area of our lives. So what I can do in 10 minutes is to give you only 3 examples, which I have come up with in my own research without even looking for them, and which show actually in the entanglements of colonialism and modernity, just as Stefan in the presentation, in the introduction mentioned. So let's begin with the easiest part and with concepts. I would consider myself also a conceptual historian, and it's Koselleck who gave me this heritage to understand a little bit where the concepts come from and what are the histories entailed into them. So if I already mentioned a little bit the concepts which have evolved from colonialism, I mentioned perhaps postcolonialism, which of course does not mean that colonialism is closed and up, but it continues. I also mentioned already coloniality. Sorry, that's an E missing there. Colonial history, and we could also go back and see that the word colonist, colonizer, colonized, and even Columbus are related to the word colonialism. So to give you a little idea to make a connection to the first presentation, there's this big question: how do we orient ourselves in the city? And if you know the work of Sara Ahmed, probably you will know that already the word orient, it's coming from an orientalization of the world. So it goes back to this guy who is remembered in almost every city of the world, and not just in the history, but anew. I'm talking about Columbus, of course, and yes, I think it's really important to mention that many cities, also the city where I am based, Hamburg, has decided to recover this heritage, which, of course, he never comes along. There's always the comrades coming along, so Vasco da Gama, Amerigo Vespucci, Diego de Leon, and all of the criminals that plundered the world and enslaved people. So that's a problem. The second example I want to give you, it's a little bit also what Stefan already mentioned in the introduction. So when we see a building and when you enter a public institution in Europe, much probably there will be a colonial history attached to that building, but you will not know it probably, and the institution will also ignore it. So that's why many authors speak about colonial amnesia or even politics of forgetfulness. Yes, just to give you one of the most known examples right now, which is being discussed in the media, Harvard has been built from the extraction of human labor. And they are dealing with this history right now. But it's not just a history about the States. I can also take you to my home city, Hamburg, and it has not exactly the same story, but a parallel story which can be also told from the mines of South Africa, which was built actually as a colonial museum, and it's not, it was not a colonial museum, sorry, a colonial institute which became afterwards a university. So we see that there's a connection between the mines in South Africa, the exploitation of nature and resources, and modern institutions of higher education in Europe. And yes, because we are here now, and I think it's really important to mention also that there are founding moments in the history of modernity which show precisely the entanglements between colonialism and modernity, or modernism. And I do have to mention these really dramatic events which took place in almost every big city around Europe until mid of the 20th century. I'm talking about the colonial expositions. So I'll brought you some of the pictures which are of course really problematic, and I had to cut every time the racist representation of the person who was also part of the publicity of this event which took place in many cities in Germany, of course also in France and in Spain and in London. You see this one, for example, from Kassel, so taking place not that far away. And I just want you to think a little bit about the connections between architecture and the way of urbanizing the world, also in relation to what Socrates said at the first presentation, in this kind of wound that characterize our cities, in which there is always a division between what is supposed to be modern and what is supposed to be oriental or uncivilized. And these events are precisely performed for this contraposition of realities to be consumed by the visitors. So you see another one, for example, come to Paris, and you see the different buildings. And I just want to mention one really striking event at the World Fair of 89, as the Eiffel Tower was inaugurated. At the same time, there were people, mostly from Senegal, displaced along the Champs of Mars. So we forget that contraposition. There's nothing in the city of Paris which is remembering to that racist event. And at the same moment, the grand ensemble, what became today the banlieues, were presented in one of these settings. So we have these three events taking place at the same time, and which actually show how the world was being urbanized, as Membe calls it. And yes, so you skipped it, but I do brought it back. Stefan, the Glass Palace should be an important symbol for this intertwinings between modernity, colonialism, and the urbanization of the world. What does it mean to us? I just brought you a quote from The Guardian. There's really no author there, but I think we could also apply it to our own German societies. Yes, so I hope you had enough time to read it. So there's a problem if we do not acknowledge the colonial past of our cities, and if we continue to orient ourselves with semantics that reproduce this colonial violence. So instead of asking, do they speak, as Spivak most prominently said, I would invite you to ask this question: why don't we listen? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tania Mancheno.